Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Demonic Grounds, Black Women and the Cartographies of Struggle by Katherine McKittrick. Narrated by Machelle Williams. Introduction. Geographic Stories. I don't want no fucking country, here or there and all the way back. I don't like it. None of it. Easy as that. Dionne Brand. When Dionne Brand writes, she writes the land. Her important collection of poetry, Land to Light On, is a map. But this map does not easily follow existing cartographic rules, borders, and lines. Land to Light On provides a different geographic story, one which allows pavement to answer questions, most of the world to be swallowed up by a woman's mouth, and Chatham, Buxton, Ontario sites haunted by the Underground Railroad, to be embedded with Uganda, Sri Lanka, slave castles, and the entries and exits of Sarah Vaughan's singing. And Brand gives up on land, too. She not only refuses a comfortable belonging to nation or country, or a local street, she alters them by demonstrating that geography, the material world, is infused with sensations and distinct ways of knowing. Rooms full of weeping, exhausted countries, a house that is only as safe as flesh. Brand's decision to give up on land, to want no country, to disclose that geography is always human and that humanness is always geographic. Blood, bones, hands, lips, wrists. This is your land, your planet, your road, your sea. Suggests that her surroundings are speakable. And this speakability is not only communicated through the poet, allowing her to emphasize the alterability of space and place, to give up on land and imagine new geographic stories. In her work, geography holds in it the possibility to speak for itself. Brand's sense of place continually reminds me that human geography needs some philosophical attention. She reminds me that the earth is also skin, and that a young girl can legitimately take possession of a street or an entire city, albeit on different terms than we may be familiar with. So this philosophical attention is not only needed because existing cartographic rules unjustly organize human hierarchies in place and reify uneven geographies in familiar, seemingly natural ways. This attention is also needed because if we trust Brand's insights, these rules are alterable, and there exists a terrain through which different geographic stories can be and are told. Demonic Grounds is, in its broadest sense, an interdisciplinary analysis of Black women's geographies in the Black diaspora. It seeks to consider what kinds of possibilities emerge when Black studies encounters human geography. Drawing on creative, conceptual, and material geographies from Canada, the United States, and the Caribbean, I explore the interplay between geographies of domination, such as transatlantic slavery and racial sexual displacement, and Black women's geographies, such as their knowledges, negotiations, and experiences. This interplay interests me because it enables a way to think about the place of Black subjects in a diasporic context that takes up spatial histories as they constitute our present geographic organization. This relationship between Black populations and geography, and here I am referring to geography as space, place, and location in their physical materiality and imaginative configurations, allows us to engage with a narrative that locates and draws on Black histories and Black subjects in order to make visible social lives, which are often displaced, rendered ungeographic. Black histories where, for example, progress, voyaging, and rationality meet violence and enslavement are worked out in geography, in space and place, in the physical world. Geographies and geographers' well-known history in the Americas of white masculine European mappings, explorations, conquests, is interlaced with a different sense of place. Those populations and their attendant geographies that are concealed by what might be called rational spatial colonization and domination, the profitable erasure and objectification of subaltern subjectivities, stories, and lands. Let me give a telling example to outline the ways in which progress and exploration are entwined with a different sense of Black place. The ships of transatlantic slavery moving across the Middle Passage, transporting humans for free labor into newer worlds, do not only cite modern technological progression, which materially moves diasporic subjects through space, that is, on and across the ocean and on and across land masses, such as Canada, the United States, the Caribbean. These vessels also expose a very meaningful struggle for freedom in place. Technologies of transportation, in this case the ship, while materially and ideologically enclosing Black subjects, economic objects inside and often bound to the ship's walls, also contribute to the formation of an oppositional geography, the ship as a location of Black subjectivity and human terror, Black resistance, and in some cases, Black possession. But the landscape, our surroundings, and our everyday places, the vessels of human violence, so often disguise these important Black geographies. They can hide what Sylvia Wynter calls the imperative of a perspective of struggle. Geography's discursive attachment to stasis and physicality, the idea that space just is, and that space and place are merely containers for human complexities and social relations, is terribly seductive. That which just is not only anchors our selfhood and feet to the ground, it seemingly calibrates and normalizes where, and therefore who, we are. The slave ship as a materiality contains and regulates. It hides Black humanity because it just is, and because those inside, bound to the walls, are neither seeable nor liberated subjects. As Alauda Equiano writes, the ship was a location of suppression upheld, in part, by Black grief and death. It hid and suffocated human cargo and curtailed resistances. His memories of the slave ship suggest that its materiality, above and below the deck, in part disguised human terror. The imperative perspective of Black struggle is undermined by the social processes and material three-dimensionalities that contribute to the workings of the geographies of slavery. The walls of the ship, the process of economic expansion, human objectification, laboring, and ungeographic bodies, human cargo. The where of Black geographies and Black subjectivity, then, is often aligned with spatial processes that, apparently, fall back on seemingly predetermined stabilities, such as boundaries, color lines, proper places, fixed and settled infrastructures, and streets, oceanic containers. If space and place appear to be safely secure and unwavering, then what space and place make possible outside and beyond tangible stabilities, and from the perspective of struggle, can potentially fade away? Geography is not, however, secure and unwavering. We produce space, we produce its meanings, and we work very hard to make geography what it is. Demonic Grounds reveals that the interplay between domination and Black women's geographies is underscored by the social production of space. Concealment, marginalization, boundaries are important social processes. We make concealment happen. It is not natural, but rather names and organizes where racial sexual differentiation occurs. To return to my earlier example, the slave ship is not stable and unchanging. It is a site of violent subjugation that reveals, rather than conceals, the racial sexual location of Black cultures in the face of unfreedoms. The physicality of the slave ship, then, contributes to the process of social concealment and dehumanization. But, importantly, Black subjectivity is not swallowed up by the ship itself. Rather, the ship, its crew, Black subjects, the ocean and ports, make geography what it is, a location through which a moving technology can create differential and contextual histories. To return to Equiano, the slave ship is not simply a container hiding his displacement. It is a location through which he articulates hardship and human cruelty, in part mapping and giving new meaning to the vessel itself. The connections across the seeable and unseeable, the geographic and the seemingly ungeographic, and the struggles that indicate the material world is assessed and produced by subaltern communities. These shape my discussions. Geographic domination is a powerful process. However, if we pursue the links between practices of domination and Black women's experiences in place, we see that Black women's geographies are lived, possible, and imaginable. Black women's geographies open up a meaningful way to approach both the power and possibilities of geographic inquiry. I am not suggesting that the connections between Black women and geography are anything new. Indeed, I assume a legacy of Black women's geographies and geographic knowledges. Rather, I am suggesting that the relationship between Black women and geography opens up a conceptual arena through which more humanly workable geographies can be and are imagined. I am therefore interested in the kinds of historical and contemporary geographies that interest and impact upon Black women, and how some existing arrangements do not work at all. Easy as that. Geographies of Domination, Transatlantic Slavery, Diaspora. Black matters are spatial matters, and while we all produce, know, and negotiate space, albeit on different terms, geographies in the diaspora are accentuated by racist paradigms of the past and their ongoing hierarchical patterns. I have turned to geography and Black geographic subjects not to provide a corrective story, nor to find and discover lost geographies. Rather, I want to suggest that space and place give Black lives meaning in a world that has, for the most part, incorrectly deemed Black populations and their attendant geographies as ungeographic, and or, philosophically, undeveloped. That Black lives are necessarily geographic, but also struggle with discourses that erase and despatialize their sense of place, is where I begin to conceptualize geography. I therefore follow the insights of Kathleen Kirby, noting that the language and concreteness of geography, with its overlapping physical, metaphorical, theoretical, and experiential contours, must be conceptualized as always bringing into view material reference, external, three-dimensional spaces, and the actions taking place in space as they overlap with subjectivities, imaginations, and stories. I want to suggest that we take the language and the physicality of geography seriously, that is, as an imbrication of material and metaphorical space, so that Black lives and Black histories can be conceptualized and talked about in new ways. And part of the work involved in thinking about Black geographies is to recognize that the overlaps between materiality and language are long-standing in the diaspora, and that the legacy of racial displacement or erasure is in contradistinction to, and therefore evidence of, an ongoing critique of both geography and the ungeographic. Consequently, if there is a push to forge a conceptual connection between material or concrete spaces, language, and subjectivity, openings are made possible for envisioning an interpretive, alterable world, rather than a transparent and knowable world. Geography, then, materially and discursively extends to cover three-dimensional spaces and places. The physical landscape and infrastructures, geographic imaginations, the practice of mapping, exploring, and seeing, and social relations in and across space. Geography is also geography, an academic discipline and a set of theoretical concerns developed by human geographers, such as the importance of the ways in which material spaces and places underpin shifting and uneven racial, sexual, economic, social relations. In order to examine Black women's relationship to these diverse geographic conceptualizations, I have employed the term traditional geography, which points to formulations that assume we can view, assess, and ethically organize the world from a stable, white, patriarchal, Eurocentric, heterosexual, classed vantage point. While these formulations, cartographic, positivist, imperialist, have been retained and resisted within and beyond the discipline of human geography, they also clarify that Black women are negotiating a geographic landscape that is upheld by a legacy of exploitation, exploration, and conquest. If we imagine that traditional geographies are upheld by their three-dimensionality, as well as a corresponding language of insides and outsides, borders and belongings, and inclusions and exclusions, we can expose domination as a visual, spatial project that organizes names and sees social differences, such as Black femininity, and determines where social order happens. The history of Black subjects in the diaspora is a geographic story that is, at least in part, a story of material and conceptual placements and displacements, segregations and integrations, margins and centers, and migrations and settlements. These spatial binaries, while certainly not complete or fully accurate, also underscore the classificatory where of race. Practices and locations of racial domination, for example, slave ships, racial sexual violences, and practices of resistance, for example, ship coups, escape routes, imaginary and real respatializations, also importantly locate what Saida Hartman calls a striking contradiction, wherein objectification is coupled with Black humanity/personhood. In terms of geography, this contradiction maps the ties and tensions between material and ideological dominations and oppositional spatial practices. Black geographies and Black women's geographies, then, signal alternative patterns that work alongside and across traditional geographies. Indeed, Black matters are spatial matters. The displacement of difference, geographic domination, transatlantic slavery, and the Black Atlantic Ocean differently contribute to mapping out the real and imaginative geographies of Black women. They are understood here as social processes that make geography a racial, sexual terrain. Hence, Black women's lives and experiences become especially visible through those concepts and moments because they clarify that Blackness is integral to the production of space. To put it another way, social practices create landscapes and contribute to how we organize, build, and imagine our surroundings. Black subjects are not indifferent to these practices and landscapes. Rather, they are connected to them due to crude racial sexual hierarchies and due to their, often unacknowledged, status as geographic beings who have a stake in the production of space. Black women's histories, lives, and spaces must be understood as enmeshing with traditional geographic arrangements in order to identify a different way of knowing and writing the social world and to expand how the production of space is achieved across terrains of domination. The production of space is caught up in, but does not guarantee, long-standing geographic frameworks that materially and philosophically arrange the planet according to a seemingly stable white, heterosexual, classed vantage point. If prevailing geographic distributions and interactions are racially, sexually, and economically hierarchical, these hierarchies are naturalized by repetitively spatializing difference, that is, placing the world within an ideological order unevenly. Practices of domination, sustained by a unitary vantage point, naturalize both identity and place, repetitively spatializing where non-dominant groups naturally belong. This is, for the most part, accomplished through economic, ideological, social, and political processes that see and position the racial sexual body within what seem like predetermined or appropriate places, and assume that this arrangement is commonsensical. This naturalization of difference is in part bolstered by the ideological weight of transparent space, the idea that space just is, and the illusion that the external world is readily knowable and not in need of evaluation, and that what we see is true. If who we see is tied up with where we see through truthful, commonsensical narratives, then the displacement of subaltern bodies deceptively hardens spatial binaries, in turn suggesting that some bodies belong, some bodies do not belong, and some bodies are out of place. For Black women, then, geographic domination is worked out through reading and managing their specific racial sexual bodies. This management effectively, but not completely, displaces Black geographic knowledge by assuming that Black femininity is altogether knowable, unknowing, and expendable. She is seemingly in place by being out of place. The simultaneous naturalization of bodies and places must be disclosed, and therefore called into question, if we want to think about alternative spatial practices and more humanly workable geographies. Borrowing from Ruth Wilson Gilmore, I want to suggest that geographies of domination be understood as the displacement of difference, wherein particular kinds of bodies, one by one, are materially, if not always visibly, configured by racism into a hierarchy of human and inhuman persons that in sum form the category of human being. Gilmore highlights the ways in which human and spatial differentiations are connected to the process of making place. The displacement of difference does not describe human hierarchies, but rather demonstrates the ways in which these hierarchies are critical categories of social and spatial struggle. Thus, practices of domination are necessarily caught up in a different way of knowing and writing the social world, which foregrounds the geographical imperatives that lie at the heart of every struggle for social justice. This material spatialization of difference, for my purposes, the spatialization of the racial, sexual Black subject, in various times and locations, in turn makes visible new or unacknowledged strategies of social struggle. Geographic domination, then, is conceptually and materially bound up with racial sexual displacement and the knowledge power of a unitary vantage point. It is not a finished or immovable act, but it does signal unjust spatial practices. It is not a natural system, but rather a working system that manages the social world. It is meant to recognize the hierarchies of human and inhuman persons and reveal how this social categorization is also a contested geographic project. I draw on the history of transatlantic slavery to illustrate that Black women are both shaped by and challenge traditional geographical arrangements. My discussions are underwritten by transatlantic slavery because this history heightens the meaning of traditional arrangements, which rest on a crucial geographic paradigm, human captivity. Transatlantic slavery profited from Black enslavement by exacting material and philosophical Black subordinations. A vast project, the practice of slavery differently impacted upon Black diaspora populations in Africa, the Caribbean, South America, Canada, the United States, and various parts of Europe between the 17th and 19th centuries. Slavery differed markedly in different locations. For example, periods of institution and abolishment, the scale of the trade, and uses of slave labor all produce unique time-space differentiations. At the same time, the particularity of slaves' lives and selves, gender, age, labor tasks, phenotype, ethnicity, language, time, place, fracture the meanings of slavery even further. As histories, recollections, and narratives of slavery clearly demonstrate, different slaves negotiated bondage in very different ways. While it is not within the scope of this introduction or project to particularize and spatialize all geographies of transatlantic slavery, I sketch out below the central ideas that have shaped my analysis. What I feel is important to outline in terms of the geographies of transatlantic slavery and my larger discussion on Black women's geographies is not so much the vast and differential processes of captivity. Instead, I turn to slavery through memories, writings, theories, and geographies to address the idea that locations of captivity initiate a different sense of place through which Black women can manipulate the categories and sites that constrain them. Of course, the technologies and violences of slavery, as they are spatialized, do not disappear when Black women assert their sense of place. But Black women also inhabited what Jenny Sharp calls the crevices of power, necessary to enslavement, and from this location, some were able to manipulate and recast the meanings of slavery's geographic terrain. Their different practices of spatial manipulation make possible a way to analyze 4 interrelated processes that identify the social production of space, the naturalization of identity and place, discussed above, the ways in which geographic enslavement is developed through the constructs of Black womanhood and femininity, the spatial practices Black women employ across and beyond domination, and the ways in which geography, although seemingly static, is an alterable terrain. I have drawn on the legacy of transatlantic slavery to advance a discussion of Black women's geographic options as they are often crudely aligned with historically present racial sexual categorizations. More specifically, transatlantic slavery incited meaningful geographic processes that were interconnected with the category of Black woman. This category not only visually and socially represented a particular kind of gendered servitude, it was embedded in the landscape. Geographically, the category of Black woman evidenced human/inhuman and masculine/feminine racial organization. The classification of Black femininity was therefore also a process of placing her within the broader system of servitude, as an inhuman racial sexual worker, as an objectified body, as a site through which sex, violence, and reproduction can be imagined and enacted, and as a captive human. Her classificatory racial sexual body, then, determined her whereabouts in relation to her humanity. As some Black feminists have suggested, the category of Black woman during transatlantic slavery affects, but does not necessarily twin, our contemporary understandings of human normalcy. Further, our present landscape is both haunted and developed by old and new hierarchies of humanness. If past human categorization was spatialized in ships and on plantations, in homes, communities, nations, islands, and regions, it also evidences the ways in which some of the impressions of transatlantic slavery leak into the future, in essence, recycling the displacement of difference. Of course, much has changed in the natural and social environment, but our historical geographies and the ways in which we make and know space now are connected. They are held together by what Carol Boyce Davies and Monica Jardine describe as a series of remapping exercises in which various land spaces are located within an orbit of control. I am not suggesting that the violence of transatlantic slavery is an ongoing, unchanging, unopposed practice, but rather that it is a legacy that carries with it, for Black and non-Black peoples, living effects, seething and lingering of what seems over and done with. I want to suggest that the category of Black woman is intimately connected with past and present spatial organization, and that Black femininity and Black women's humanness are bound up in an ongoing geographic struggle. While Black womanhood is not static and ahistoric, the continuities, context, and ruptures that contribute to the construction of Black femininity shed light on how Black women have situated themselves in a world that profits from their specific displacements of difference. Identifying Black women as viable contributors to an ongoing geographic struggle, rather than, for example, solely through the constructs of race or race/class/gender/sexuality, is critical to my argument. I want to emphasize that contextual spatial analysis do not relegate Black women to the margins or insist that the spatialization of Black femininity just was and just is. While I have suggested that geography through
Sample complete. Ready to continue?